bound for ground posts in Saudi Arabia. After reviewing the troops, he went to Atlanta, Georgia, and held a news briefing. Coming up next, we bring you the Secretary's comments.
I don't come with any formally prepared remarks. When I get out on the road like this, I like to spend some time with the press and give all you an opportunity to ask questions. Let me just say a word or two about the stop this morning. This was an opportunity for me to go by Fort Stewart and visit with the 24th Infantry Division Mechanized. They are, of course, in the middle of preparations to ship out to Saudi Arabia as part of Operation Desert Shield. I spent some time with the division commander, General McCaffrey, getting briefed on the status of their operations. Visited with the unit as they loaded up tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles on railroad cars. Spent some time with the families at a family support center. Talked to a number of the wives, and then went and visited with one of the battalion commanders and some of the key enlisted people in his unit who were undergoing various kinds of training preparatory to their deployment to the Middle East. My general impression is that the division's in very good shape, that the movement has gone very well. It's got the normal kinds of complications that go with moving that many men and that much material that far. But it's, I think, been a truly impressive performance to date in terms of the ability of our various units, in this case an Army unit, but several others, the Navy, Marines, and Air Force as well, in terms of moving significant U.S. forces to a very important part of the world. With that, I'd be happy to respond to your questions.
Mr. Secretary, I know that you're heading to Saudi Arabia this Friday. What do you expect to find there? Have you had any, are you satisfied with the deployment of American forces there in the desert?
I am satisfied to date from everything I know. I follow this on a regular basis throughout the day, begin each day with a brief on the situation in that part of the world and the status of our current forces there. I was in Saudi Arabia last week to visit, of course, with Saudi officials. Main reason for going back now, in addition to stopping for some brief talks in Saudi Arabia and some of the other governments in the region, is to visit with U.S. forces. And I want a chance to get out and see some of our naval forces that are deployed there in carrier battle groups, spend some time with some units of the Air Force, and hopefully also stop and see some of our ground units that are there as well. And it's basically to go back to learn as much as I can about how the deployment's actually going. We've got this huge mechanism now in place, a pipeline, if you will, and it's important that the flow go as smoothly as possible, and to find out what we need, what's working right, and what needs additional considerations.
And a follow-up to that, have you heard of any problems in the deployment there so far? Anything you're going to be looking at particularly when you do that?
No, I mean, I don't want to say it's flawless. There are always problems in this kind of movement, but I think the important thing is that each of the problems as it arises is being worked and the problem solved. Yesterday here at Savannah, we had a ship loaded out that when it got finished was actually on the bottom of the river because the load was so heavy. We had to wait for the tide to come in to get it out. I mean, those kinds of problems arise. Matching up the flow of men and equipment and munitions and supplies is obviously an enormously complicated task. Just coordinating something that complicated. I don't think there's probably any other organization in the world who could do what the United States military is currently doing. And I don't want to say as I say, that it's flawless. I'm sure we'll learn a lot of lessons from this operation, but by the same token, it does appear to be working amazingly well because we are able to surmount each problem as it arises.
Mr. Secretary, are you going to call up the reserve, I guess, is what a lot of people are worried about. Some people have been called up already. With so many people going overseas, somebody's going to have to take those places here in this country. Are you going to mobilize?
We have not made any decision yet in terms of an overall call-up of reserve units. The President has the authority under existing statutes to call up to 200,000 personnel for a 90-day period, and then that can be extended for another 90-day period. And as I say, the decision simply hasn't been made yet. The fact of the matter is, we have over the years built a very heavy reliance on reserve units into our forces. The concept that Congress has pursued and prior administrations is that certain key functions would be performed or assigned primarily to reserve or guard units. The result is, for example, when you start to look for medical personnel, you'll find an awful lot of those are reservists. And the way you fill that kind of need in the midst of a major deployment like this is to call upon those individuals. Now, we used some reservists in Panama. Lots of times we're able to do it on a volunteer basis, just to send out that we need a notice that we need so many people with certain types of skills, and in relatively small operations that's adequate. We have not yet made a decision about whether or not it will be necessary in this particular situation to call specifically for additional reserve units to be called out.
Let's follow up. Is it going to reach 250,000 like some of the reports we've seen?
I wouldn't give a lot of credence to the reports that are out there because, frankly, we haven't set a number at this point. We've started the flow. We're moving significant forces to Saudi Arabia. I've said that over and over again. This is a major commitment of U.S. forces. How many we ultimately deploy will depend upon developments.
Mr. Secretary.
How many are there now, sir?
No.
Mr.
Do
Secretary.
you anticipate having to blockade the port of Aqaba or restrict supplies going through there, since that seems to be the way the Iraqis might get supplies in?
Well, I currently am under instructions from the President to organize, to implement the steps needed to respond to the request of the legitimate government of Kuwait to assist them in dealing with the situation that's developed in their nation. They make that request under Article 51, the UN Charter, which specifies the right of self-defense. We also are in the business of implementing the resolutions adopted by the UN Security Council, 660 and 661, that provide for mandatory economic sanctions on Iraq. We have not yet issued the orders to carry out those steps, but we're in the process now of getting ready to do exactly that. To get specific in terms of how it actually would be applied, I'd want to withhold judgment yet for a day or two until we've got rules of engagement crafted and signed off on. But clearly it is our intention to see to it that the sanctions are carried out, that they're made as complete as possible. Compliance to date has been very good on a volunteer basis. Most of the nations of the world are in fact in compliance with the UN voted sanctions. We are part of a multinational effort in Saudi Arabia, the Persian Gulf, the Middle East. We're working with forces of other nations, and I think it's important to emphasize the international tone of this venture. But at the appropriate point, obviously we will be prepared to do what's necessary to see to it that the sanctions are effective.
Mr. Secretary.
Port of Aqaba and what is necessary.
I won't go beyond what I just said.
You spoke about the multinational force. Who exactly is in charge of this force? Who's calling the shots over there? What options are being discussed as to who's going to be in charge of responding to any aggression by Iran?
Well, the overall coordination, if you will, I think would be the best way to describe it, obviously is with the government of Saudi Arabia, King Fahd and his senior advisors, Prince Sultan, the defense minister, and their chief of staff. U.S. forces that are being deployed there are under the command of General Norman Schwarzkopf, who's our central commander. He's the sink, if you will, for that area of responsibility. The chain of command flows from the President to me, through the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Powell, out to General Schwarzkopf, who handles the command immediately on the scene. U.S. forces deployed under those circumstances are authorized to defend themselves. They have rules of engagement that make it possible for them to react, to exercise the inherent right of self-defense, if you will. Overall, in terms of our mission, specifically stated, is to deter further Iraqi aggression. That means deploying forces as they become available in the area to see to it that the Iraqis aren't tempted to go any further than they've already gone with their invasion, and be prepared to defend Saudi Arabia should deterrence fail, and also at the same time to work with the Saudis and others to see if we can enhance their own military capabilities. Yes.
We understand there were reports that an Iraqi ship may have been laying mines in the Gulf. Can you confirm, and a follow-up to that is, are there any U.S. minesweeping exercises in the Gulf that you know?
I cannot confirm the report that there may have been Iraqi mine laying. I simply don't know. Secondly, we've operated out there previously in an environment during Operation Earnest Will when we had to deal with the problem of mines, and I think we are equipped, as are many of our allies, to do so again. I'm confident we can deal with it.
Are we doing so now, do you know?
Again, I wouldn't want to get into the operational details.
What about lanes, change the rules of engagement?
I want a different question.
Has the United States assured the Saudis of how long their troops would be there, or is it open-ended?
When I met with King Fahd a week ago yesterday, at the direction of the President, I made it clear, reaffirmed, if you will, some things the President had communicated personally to the King. That was that the United States commitment was substantial, that we would deploy sufficient forces to do what needed to be done in terms of defending Saudi Arabia, should that become necessary, that we would stay until the task was complete or until the Saudis asked us to depart. That specifically was the guidance I was given by the President. That's the message that was conveyed to the Saudis, and that's the basis upon which we currently are deployed in Saudi Arabia.
Secretary Cheney, there have been some rumors afloat that the Iraqis may well send a ship through the Suez and just simply shuttle it. Scuttle it. What could be done about that? Any moves afoot to prevent such an action?
Well, the Egyptians maintain the Suez Canal. They control it. And they're the ones who grant access or deny access to the canal. That's a question that would probably be best directed to them.
Mr. Secretary, what about the question of a joint chiefs command under the United Nations flag in the Persian Gulf, getting that wrinkled out, the Soviet proposal that warships in the Persian Gulf should be under the UN flag?
I've heard just a brief reference to that proposal. I haven't seen it in detail. I'd want to take a look at it. It's a decision ultimately, obviously, the President would have to make in terms of how we would participate in that kind of a venture, and obviously the UN Security Council would have to make arrangements as well. We have long experience working with the United Nations Command. We still do in Korea. Technically, General Raskasi, who is our Commander-in-Chief in Korea, is also the UN Commander in Korea. We've maintained that command structure now for over 35 years. So we've got a lot of experience with that kind of an operation, and if a decision were made by the United Nations and concurred in by the President, then obviously we would operate accordingly.
Are there any efforts right now to interdict this Polish ship your reports say may be carrying some type of weaponry?
Again, I don't want to get into specific operational details for obvious security reasons.
Mr. Secretary, how concerned are you about anti-American sentiment in the region, and how long, even in Saudi Arabia where our troops are being stationed, and how long do you think the American people are going to be eager to put up with this extension of force?
Well, I think everybody hopes that this operation can be wrapped up as quickly as possible. But I don't want to mislead anybody into thinking that it's going to be a short-term commitment, short-term deployment, or that it will be resolved any time in the near future. I simply don't know. It will depend upon developments. Our commitment to Saudi Arabia is a very firm one. That depth and breadth of that commitment is represented in the size of the force that we're now deploying to the region. And I think we have to be prepared, if necessary, to stay there for the long haul, if in fact that becomes essential. In terms of anti-American sentiment being expressed, clearly there has been some expressed in certain quarters in the Middle East. I wish everybody were unanimously behind us, but I think the fact that the Arab League voted in Cairo last week not only to support the Saudi decision to call for support from U.S. and other forces, to condemn Iraqi aggression and to deploy their own forces to Saudi Arabia in the form of the Egyptians and the Moroccans and others who are moving into the area is testimony to the depth of feeling in the Middle East, within the Arab world, about the outrageous acts of Saddam Hussein. And I would, at this point, prefer to be in our position, both in terms of how we're equipped and deployed, and in terms of the kind of support we have, than I would be in his position.
Sir,
Somebody else who hasn't had a question yet?
If war were to break out today, who is in charge? Who's going to run the multinational forces?
Well, if war were to break out today, I would assume it would be the result of an Iraqi attack on our forces deployed in the area. And our forces have all the authority they need to respond, and they would be directly under the command of General Schwarzkopf, who reports to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Powell, who reports to me, and I report to the President.
What about Secretary?
Mr. Secretary, there have been reports that Saddam Hussein may be convening a sort of who's who of international terrorism. First of all, do you know if there's any truth in those reports? And second of all, is there any military response that can be made to such a threat?
Well, Saddam Hussein has a record previously of having, on occasion, hosted various terrorist groups and organizations in Iraq. It is an unfortunate fact of life, these kinds of developments in that part of the world, that there are people who are prepared to resort to international terrorism as a matter of national policy. Obviously, it's something you have to be concerned about, but I think it's something we can cope with.
Mr. Secretary, we've heard reports.
Secretary, do we intend to keep food also out of Iraq?
At this point, if you look at the UN resolution, the sanctions specifically cover virtually every commodity except for medicine and food for humanitarian purposes, is the precise phrase. Exactly how that will be interpreted in terms of the kinds of instructions we will give our people on the scene, something that's currently being debated with respect to how we write the rules of engagement. But as a general proposition, I would think general shipments of food would fall within the purview of the sanctions and would not be permitted. Food that fell into that category of being for humanitarian purposes would be permitted consistent with the UN sanctions, the UN voted resolution.
Secretary, a somewhat more local question real quick. Can you tell us anything about the deployment of the 197th Infantry Brigade, when they'll be leaving 20th Marine?
I cannot at this point. Well, I just have, again, we're trying to refrain from spelling out precisely which units will move at which time. It's obvious that 24th Division is going. Everybody's aware of that. But again, I don't want to specify dates and arrival times for operational security reasons.
There were reports this morning that you have devised a specific plan in case Iraq would use chemical weapons. Can you comment on that at all, whether there is a plan in the works now, specifically how to respond to a chemical attack?
I would not want to give out any details of that kind of planning. I think it would be appropriate to state the following, that we would view any attack on U.S. forces as an extremely serious matter. I think there would be a depth of revulsion in the world and in the United States if such an attack were to occur with chemical weapons. The President of the United States would make the decision about how we would respond, but it should be clear to Saddam Hussein that we have a wide range of military capabilities that would let us respond with overwhelming force and extract a very heavy price should he be foolish enough to attempt to use chemical weapons on American forces. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Sir, we have heard reports that there's some concern about female military, U.S. military personnel in Saudi Arabia. Have the Saudis expressed any concern at the troop level higher than you are?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Good evening from the nation's capital. You're watching C-SPAN. We invite you to join us tomorrow morning for a live viewer call-in program. Our guest to take your questions and comments at 8 a.m. Eastern Time will be the Iraqi ambassador to the United States, Mohammed al-Mashat. He will discuss events in the Persian Gulf from an Iraqi perspective. Our schedule continues in a few moments with today's State Department news briefings.